Gazing up at the stars in the night sky is one of the greatest sources of wonder and amazement. But beyond those stars, in the intense blackness beyond our galaxy, lies a horror too distant for our telescopes to see, but it can see us. A parasite that watches us through the intergalactic void like a window in the night, knowing at any moment it can break the glass and come in. But it doesn't. Not yet. In over 100,000 years since its creation, the Flood has spread far and wide across the galaxy, consuming flesh and biomass in the trillions. But what if it spread outside of our galaxy? What if there are galaxies out there beyond the Milky Way that have been entirely consumed by Flood? Well, there's actually a lot of evidence that suggests that hypothetical may just be true. In fact, our Milky Way may be one of the only galaxies not consumed by the Flood. Today, we investigate whether the Flood's insatiable hunger has caused it to infect other galaxies. But not before I satiate your hunger. Having just finished a 7-month-long bulk, I understand the pain that the Flood go through in their never-ending hunt for consumable, tasty and nutritious biomass, but thankfully, HelloFresh, today's sponsor, make that hunt easy. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit, delivering fresh ingredients and chef-crafted recipes to your door to help you eat better, stress less and save money. Making the meals that they deliver is so easy as well because everything comes pre-portioned. All you've got to do is get to cooking whichever way you want. Cook in the kitchen, or hell, you know me, cook out on the pit. If this year, like me, you're looking at maybe scaling back the calories and up in the protein, well, HelloFresh is the perfect partner in crime, with over 30 calorie-smart and protein-smart recipes deliverable each week, fit to your specific preferences. They even help with breakfast as well, which is a meal that I have a bad habit of skipping. If you try HelloFresh now, then they'll throw in a free breakfast item with each box as long as your subscription is active, so you can start as you mean to go on. So, to improve your biomass consumption habits today, and also save some dollar, make sure you click the link in the description or use my code to try HelloFresh today and get free breakfast for life. That's one breakfast item per box while the subscription is active. Thank you very much to HelloFresh for sponsoring this year's Biomass Games. So, to understand this deeply cosmic horror, we need to go through how the Flood evolved from a simple parasite to a species that are capable of traversing galaxies. And so, this video is going to kind of double up as a breakdown of the Flood's horrifying evolution as well. A Flood outbreak begins in the feral stage of evolution. This is the stage that we saw during the outbreak on Alpha Halo in Halo 1. Now, as the name implies, the Flood in this stage are, well, feral and uncoordinated, with no central intelligence to guide them or offer any kind of robust leadership. Besides the anomaly of the Juggernaut, they're guided simply by instinct alone. Instinct that drives them to infect and consume as much as possible. Despite their relative lack of direction in this stage, and also the fact that their hordes are limited to only infection forms, carrier forms, and combat forms, the Flood are still extremely dangerous. They move in hordes, overwhelming their victims with sheer numbers and brute force, all in the vein of gathering biomass, which is their main priority in this stage, which allows them to construct a proto-gravemind. Over time, this proto-gravemind grows thanks to the continual infection of biomass before ultimately becoming a full-blown gravemind, transitioning the Flood into the second stage of evolution, the coordinator stage. This is the stage that the Flood outbreak was in Halo 2 and Halo 3. With the dawn of the coordinator stage, the Flood becomes significantly more dangerous because now they're led by a hyper-intelligent compound mind that makes them act like a hive mind. They also gain the ability to create Flood forms from scratch. Pure forms. This means that they no longer have to infect a healthy host to bolster their numbers, they can just do it organically, but that doesn't mean that they still don't want to infect. Infection is still a big priority in this stage. It's in this stage where the outbreak really starts to spiral out of control because hives begin to be constructed. Now, Flood hives act primarily as a means of creating a perfectly controlled localized environment to facilitate the Flood's growth and expansion, which is achieved by sustaining warm, humid temperatures and also secreting Flood spores into the air, which makes breathing in the vicinity of a hive an almost guaranteed infection. Hives also act as a kind of Flood base as well, and are likely to be the #1 target of an opposing force, but their primary goal is to create the perfect environment for Flood growth. In this coordinator stage, many of the pure forms created are what's known as key minds, forms that provide local leadership and direction to other infected in highly specialized and unique manners. For example, the Helion guides sieging, whereas the Abomination just guides large hordes in general. As a part of this stage, the Flood's priorities shift from simple infection to the consumption of neural tissue and biomass, seeking to not only grow their numbers but also grow their intelligence, their knowledge, and their wisdom. The Gravemind is able to infect AIs, data networks, and even biologicals with the Logic Plague, compromising its foes' greatest informational repositories and even leaders, allowing it to gain enough intelligence to reach the third stage of evolution, the interstellar stage. Once the Gravemind has been fully established, hives, spore mountains, and other structures and defenses fully constructed, the Flood's infinite hunger compels it to spread beyond its localized blightland by leveraging any technology and knowledge available to search for others to infect. Now, as the name implies, this often entails spreading to entirely different star systems, which is now possible thanks to the knowledge that it consumed during the coordinator stage about its enemy's starships and their means of FTL travel. When starships are commandeered by the Flood, they turn them into plague ships, reinforcing them with biomass and Flood supercell growths that convert them into mobile hives, used for spreading the infection and even kamikazing down to uninfected planets to begin an outbreak. At this point, the Flood is spreading across the galaxy at an almost untrackable state. Any hope to contain this outbreak is no more. Any colony, no matter how distant or quiet, is vulnerable to infection. Entire regions of space fall victim to the parasite, regions the foreigners refer to as burns. These galactic quarantine zones are deemed entirely unrecoverable and are subject to total sterilization, rendering any world within uninhabitable. The Gravemind doesn't even necessarily require FTL-capable ships to go through subspace. Thanks to its depthless well of knowledge spanning tens of millions of years of technological advancements from species that are far more advanced than anything that exists nowadays, it can harness the power of precursor neural physics to travel through subspace without an FTL drive, as it did to get to the Ark in Halo 3. This knowledge of the precursors also allows the Flood in the interstellar stage to begin harnessing the power of their constructs, notably star roads. Ancient, esoteric precursor structures that act as pathways woven between dimensions, built with esoteric matter and neural physical links. Now, if that makes no sense whatsoever, it's kinda not supposed to. Any precursor tech isn't supposed to be comprehensible by us, that's by design. These star roads offered the Flood secret passageways through the galaxy, and were also used to physically destroy the Greater Ark towards the end of the war. Beyond the interstellar stage, there's a terrifyingly mysterious stage of evolution, one that merely exists in the final hushed whispers of dying ancients. The transgalactic stage. The transgalactic stage of Flood evolution is achieved once they've infected all star systems in a galaxy. That means that every single biological sentient being in an entire galaxy has been infected, consumed, and assimilated into the hive mind. And so too have all non-biological entities, sentients like AIs and non-sentients like computer systems, networks, and other such things. This is a total galactic apocalypse, an apocalypse in which nothing survives. The Flood now possess the knowledge and biomass of an entire galaxy, but with that have achieved critical mass, and so their next goal is to spread to neighbouring galaxies to continue consuming, and thanks to their vast knowledge, this is possible. From here, nobody's even left alive to document the next steps of Flood evolution, but theoretically, the cycle of feral to coordinated to interstellar to transgalactic would just repeat in galaxies until eventually the Flood reached, and again, this is just my own theoretical headcanon, the trans-universe stage when all galaxies in a universe had been consumed and they gained the ability to jump to entirely separate universes, but my god, that is a horror that I don't even want to contemplate. You know, it's safe to say that if a Flood outbreak reaches the point where it's spread so far and wide, it can literally hop universes. None of us are even going to be here to contemplate it, so for better or worse, that's a thought that we don't even need to have. And so, that brings us to the other part of this video. There is significant evidence to suggest that the Flood, during and actually even before the Foreigner Flood War, could have very likely reached this transgalactic stage and spread beyond the Milky Way galaxy. That means that the Flood have potentially spread beyond the effective range of the halos. Now, that should scream something quite obvious, but if it's not screaming it, then let me just say it in plain words for you. That means that right now, as of the 2560s, or you know, if you want to really put the tinfoil hat on and say that our universe is the same as Halo's universe, the 2020s, there are entire galaxies out there somewhere infected by the Flood. Again, theoretically, in the background of the events of Infinite, up there in the sky, the Flood are spreading from galaxy to galaxy. And you know, if you do choose to believe this, and trust me if you don't, I'm going to try and convince you in a second, you could also make the logical assumption that there is a chance that a higher percentage of the universe is infected by the Flood than not infected. But that's a source of cosmic horror that is very, very, very hypothetical and not canon, at least as far as we know, by any means. But anyway, let's get to the evidence. The first of which is courtesy of Guilty Spark.
Oh, hello.
So, in one of the Halo 1 anniversary terminals, Spark says that he has no reason to believe the entirety of the Flood are in our galaxy. More may be waiting in the frozen void beyond our galaxy.
Of course, I have no reason to believe that here lies the entirety of the parasite. It may be waiting in the frozen void beyond this galaxy, or worse, inexorably drifting toward us.
Now granted, at this point, Spark was in the throes of loneliness-induced rampancy, so take this with a grain of salt, but the mere fact that a monitor even thought to speculate about the Flood existing in other galaxies is kinda telling to me. But the most glaring evidence comes straight from the horse's mouth. In Halo Silentium, the Gravemind declares it has consumed 10,000 planets and brought entire galaxies to an end, which obviously implies that either during or before the Foreigner Flood War, the Flood had reached the transgalactic stage and had infected other galaxies. But again, there is a caveat to this quote. The way this information was delivered was essentially propaganda. It was said in the final hours of the war when the Librarian was stranded on Earth, and the Gravemind sends the essences of ancient human warriors inhabiting the bodies of rotting, infected composer victims to essentially torment the Librarian, revealing the true precursor nature of the domain and other such things. Now, granted, it wasn't lying about the domain. The domain is a precursor entity, so it wasn't wrong about everything, but like I said, it's kind of propaganda, kind of Flood propaganda, so do take it with a little pinch of salt. Now, what isn't as subjective though is the stage of evolution that the Flood reached during the scarcely documented human Flood War that preceded the Foreigner Flood War. When the Flood first emerged in the Halo universe, it ran rampant throughout human regions of the Milky Way, so much so that the humans were forced to retreat into Foreigner-controlled space. Entire colonies and star systems that were once human-controlled were infected, which confirms that the Flood, at the time, had reached the interstellar stage. However, when the Foreigners exterminated and devolved the humans for at least what they thought was an invasion of their territory, the Flood chose to recede and didn't continue their spread into Foreigner space. Now, the reason for this wasn't because they couldn't spread into Foreigner-controlled space, but rather because they chose not to. Their retreat was part of a larger, wider strategy, a greater plan to bring about immense pain and, through that pain, great unity, which they eventually achieved when they returned 10,000 years later. However, the Flood's choice to voluntarily retreat implies that they did have the capabilities to spread to Foreigner systems, and thus, other star systems as well. And so, in those 10,000 years where the Foreigners believed the Flood had been defeated or died off, I think there's a pretty high chance that they spread to other systems as well. I mean, what else do you think they did during that massive gap of time? Just like, hang around? Wait? I doubt the Flood just chilled for 10,000 years. That's not really their prerogative. Even if during their initial spread through human space they didn't reach the transgalactic stage, which honestly I don't think they did at that point, that still doesn't rule out the Flood spreading to other galaxies to increase their infected numbers. After all, the transition from interstellar to transgalactic is done out of pure necessity, not because one specific piece of technology is discovered or a specific Flood form is created, like the transition from feral to coordinated requiring a Gravemind. There's none of that. It's pure necessity. It's done because they've consumed everything in the current galaxy and can only continue to consume by moving on to a different one, and so I don't think it's out of the equation for the Flood to have spread to nearby dwarf galaxies in between humanity's defeat and the Horror of Flood War. I mean, human-controlled space was right on the edge of the Milky Way, so much so that only one hemisphere of their capital world, Charum Hakor, had stars in its night sky. So out of anywhere in the galaxy, this was arguably the closest to other galaxies, and it just so happened to be infected. The Flood spreading to other galaxies during this time as well just perfectly lines up with not just their need to constantly consume, but also their need to bring unity. They intentionally retreated from the Foreigners, likely to instill a false sense of security, but they still would have wanted to consume. That wouldn't have just gone away, and so traveling to nearby galaxies using highly advanced ancient human technology and infecting those galaxies and consuming them would line up well. The only external galaxy that we know isn't infected, or at least wasn't infected as of the end of the Horror of Flood War, there's nothing to say that Flood from other galaxies haven't come to it since, is Path Chthona, or the Large Magellanic Cloud as it was called, which was where Faber test-fired Omega Halo. Obviously, firing a Halo in the galaxy is going to do a lot of damage to any Flood there, so as of the end of the Horror of Flood War, there's no Flood there, but like I said, who's to say that more Flood didn't come in from other galaxies? Never know. But the big question at this point is, if there are other galaxies out there entirely infected by the Flood, why haven't they come to our galaxy yet? Well, I think the most likely answer is the same reason that they left the Foreigners alone for 10,000 years. It's part of some greater plan, which the Primordial declared to the Isodidact moments before being turned to dust. It was long ago decided. Foreigners will never bear the mantle. The decision is final. Humans will replace you. Humans will be tested next. It is the way of those who seek out the truth of the mantle. Humans will rise. Whether they will also fail has not yet been decided. The Precursor's final test for the mantle. Now, this is something that I've been talking about for 8 years now. Jesus Christ, 8 years, that's a long time. Basically, what this final test is it was a plot device that was set up in Halo Primordium in 2012 that, should this device ever be used in a story, should theoretically mark the ultimate return of the Flood. And what better way for that to happen than for literal entire galaxies of Flood to descend upon humanity. The whole point of this test is to test humanity at their absolute peak. To see if, at their strongest, at their ripest, they're powerful, intelligent, and caring enough to be able to uphold the mantle of responsibility, protecting all of the species in the galaxy from the ultimate threat. Not to go full Mob of the Dead on you or anything, but I've been convinced now, for like the better part of the last decade, that Halo's universe is stuck in a cycle perpetuated by the Precursors and the Flood, and that to break that cycle means that a species have successfully passed the test and are fit to hold the mantle. The cycle begins with the Precursors seeding a galaxy, as they have done countless times in the billion years of their existence, with the hopes that one of their creations that they're seeding will be fit to hold the mantle one day. They then let the species evolve and advance, and when the Precursors deem them ripe, they inflict the test with the Flood. If the species win and defeat the Flood, they're proven fit to hold the mantle. If they lose, the entire galaxy is infected, and then the cycle repeats, just in a different galaxy with a different species. Humanity and our galaxy just happen to be the next repetition of the cycle. If we fail the test, then our galaxy, the Milky Way, is overwhelmed with Flood and the cycle repeats in another galaxy. But if that's the case, and there are other galaxies out there that have failed to break the cycle and thus are entirely infected with Flood, why haven't the powers that be sent those Flood to our galaxy to test us yet? Well, the Primordial emphasizes that the Flood will return when humanity are ripe. Now, yes, you could make the argument that this could be referring to any of the outbreaks during the original Halo trilogy, but I think to say that humanity were ripe for testing during the Halo trilogy, during the Human Covenant War, would be kind of false. We were on the back foot getting our asses kicked that entire war, and we are right now as well. Ripeness to me implies that humanity are the dominant force in the galaxy, but not in an oppressive way. Rather, in a caring way, which is what the mantle enforces, and will only be in that state once every current major threat is eliminated. Cycles, infinite loops, and ancient conspiracy theories aside though, the mere thought that there genuinely could be other galaxies out there in the sky beyond our reach festering with flood is a truly terrifying thought. It really encapsulates the kind of cosmic horror and also fear of the unknown that the flood are so effective at inducing. But what do you think? Do you think that there are trillions of infected out there beyond the reaches of our galaxy? Or do you think that the only flood in existence are locked away in containment facilities and also on that one pelican from Site 22 flying to an unknown location? Let me know down in the comments. And with that said, I want to round this one out here. I want to give a huge thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the continued support over there as per usual. And thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next one.